One of the things you talked about, both justices did, was communicating with the public. And it's an issue we struggle with at the state level, and that's televising the proceedings. Now, there's a video, there's an audio of the Supreme Court, but it gets to your point. One of you mentioned the public that doesn't necessarily know how things work. Clearly, the public's trust in almost all government institutions is at an all-time low. The perhaps way overused expression from, I think, 1916 from Justice Brandeis about sunshine being the best disinfectant. Is that issue still possible to televise the proceedings of the court?
We take the position, my position is, and I think a number of the other justices, that we are a teaching institution, and we teach by not having the television there because we teach that we're judged by what we write, by the reasons that we give. Now, you could have an Oxford-style debate if you were in college, and if you drew the side that said you want cameras in the courtroom, you could make a number of very important points. Number one, as you indicated, Congressman, we're in the business of teaching. Not everybody can see an oral argument. It's a great civics lesson. For the attorney who's going to appear for the first time, it would be invaluable to have some tapes to see how the oral arguments work. You can't get exactly the dynamic from the oral transcripts. So if you were making debate points, you could score a tremendous number of points by taking the affirmative position that we should have cameras in the courtroom. It's not an unreasonable position. We feel, number one, that our institution works. And in my own view, there would be considerable reluctance to introduce a dynamic where I would have the instinct that one of my colleagues asked a question because we're on television. I just don't want that insidious dynamic to intervene between me and my colleagues when we have only a half an hour. So we think that in our courtroom, the cameras would be inconsistent with the tradition of oral argument in the court that we have. I say we. I think I speak for a majority of the justices and myself. Sometimes in trial courts, the cameras are good so the public can see when the system is broken, when it isn't functioning. That's important. That's important. And one of the things we're facing is with newspapers facing critical financial problems, they're laying off court reporters. That is to say, press reporters who go into the courtrooms, police court reporters. And this is very, very important. This is a real check because you need an experienced reporter to know if that judge is being irascible and unfair or just necessarily stern with an attorney. You have to have an experienced reporter to understand that. And the blogs won't take care of it. Blogs can fill in for what a lot of newspapers do. They can't fill in for this. So it may be that cameras in courtrooms are more important, not less, when experienced police reporters are not paid by the press to do the job they historically did.
But Justice, I've seen a lot of theatrics in courtrooms, and some of it beget, I suppose, from TV cameras or an attorney advertising. In all my life, I can't imagine the Supreme Court acting in a way other than that which they normally would, whether there's cameras there or not. But I respect your point. Well, Justice Breyer?
It's quite a difficult question, and I get asked a lot. And I very much like the idea of having a courtroom in the oral argument, which is what you're talking about. When I think of a case, like remember the Arkansas case, which was whether you could have term limits in the House. Could you limit the members? Yeah, it was. Could you limit term limits? And my goodness, that was a difficult case. You see Jefferson, you read, he said one thing. And Hamilton and Madison said another thing, and Story said another thing, and you go back into history, and it's really evenly balanced. And if the people if 1 million people could have seen that oral argument, I thought that was one of the best oral arguments you had. You would have seen 9 people really struggling with a very, very hard issue and trying to reach the correct result. So it would be so educational. That would be wonderful. So that's the plus side. So you say, well, why are you hesitant? I'd absolutely begin where Justice Kennedy does. We're a very conservative institution. It's a small c. We're there as trustees. It was going before we came. It'll be there after we go. And the last thing any one of us wants to do is to do something that'll make it worse as an institution. So what's the relevance of that? Well, I sometimes worry on a subject you'll know better than me. We're a symbol. If we bring the cameras into the courtroom, it'll be in every criminal court in the country. You want it in every criminal court, in every case? What about juries? What about witnesses? What about intimidation? I worry about that, but there I say you're the expert. I'm not. Then I think, well, the oral argument's only about 2%. This is not oral argument that matters in the case. It matters in a few cases, yes, and it helps always. But that's not what this is turning on. That's an appellate court argument. You've been in appellate courts. You understand it. And I'm trying to decide a matter of law which will affect 200 million people who are not in that room. But when you look at something on television, as opposed to reading about it in the newspaper, you identify. Human beings identify with other people. There's the good one, there's the bad one. And then they get the clients, and believe me, there's the good one, there's the bad one. And, and so I think, yeah, but that's not what I'm here to do. And so will people get a wrong impression? But if you wanted to know what I've come to the conclusion, I might be wrong. What I think is the really driving force on the negative side is this, that people who you'd find surprising, I won't say who they are, they come to me and they say, be careful. That you think it won't affect you, your questioning. You think it won't. And it doesn't affect, we have the press there every day, but believe me, if I'm on to something with a lawyer, I don't care. I might produce the most ridiculous example that I've ever thought of because I think it's going to advance me with that lawyer. That is, I'm going to get a question out of him. I'm going to get an answer. And I don't care if I look a little bit stupid in the newspaper. I'd rather get the answer. Okay? So that's my method. And what they say to me is, you think you won't change. The first time you see on primetime television somebody taking a picture of you and really using it in a way that you think is completely unfair and misses your point in order to caricature what you're trying to do because they don't believe in the side they think you're coming from. The first time you see that, the next day, you'll watch a lot more carefully what you say. Now, that's what's worrying me. So you say, well, so what? What's your action? And I say, I'm not ready yet. I want to see a little bit more of how all this works in practice. I'd give people the power to experiment. I'd try to get studies not paid for by the press of how this is working in California, of how it affects public attitudes about the law. I'd like some real objective studies. I know that's a bore, but that's where I am at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back, but I'd like the justices to contemplate something I thought about last night when I was thinking of asking you this question. When the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was released, members of the U.S. Senate didn't want it to happen because it thought it made them look bad. At the same time, representatives in the Soviet Union didn't want the movie shown there because they thought it made us look so good. I think there's a beauty of the history of the Supreme Court and what takes place there. And I think about what it would mean if generations to come could watch the arguments that took place in Brown versus Board of Education or Gideon. Extraordinary moments that changed history and made our country a better place. Watching at least 2% of part of that, I think is very, very important. And I think what you do is absolutely critical. I think there's a beauty to our system that's unparalleled in the world. And I'd like my kids to watch it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can remember as a young lawyer watching the oral arguments in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg, the famous busing case, And that is still vivid in my mind. That would be great to have the video to play that from time to time. That was probably 30, 45 years ago. Anyway, thank you. Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.